Nigeria may be recording improvements in some of its key macroeconomic indicators, but a new labor market survey suggests that the recovery is not being felt evenly across the country. The report paints 6 very different regional labor markets with problems ranging from low pay and skills gaps to infrastructure, capital constraints, and discrimination. More troubling is the willingness of Nigerians, particularly young and skilled workers, to leave regions that cannot provide opportunities. So, is Nigeria facing one national jobs crisis or 6 different crises requiring 6 different solutions? Ikemesit Effiong, partner at SBM Intelligence, joins me for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for those who probably are not aware of what this report is really all about, I'd like you to tell us what it is about. And while we're talking about, maybe 6 different issues here.
Yeah, so what we tried to do is we're all familiar with sort of the key macroeconomic wins that have been recorded under this past administration.
Past administration or this current administration?
This current administration,
I get it.
I think I'm already in 2027. Okay, yeah. So inflation not increasing by as high a clip as it has been in the past. The fuel subsidy largely gone, even though some people debate whether that is still the case. Economic growth generally okay, at least relative to the last decade or so. But we wanted to understand away from sort of the statistical macroeconomic wins, how are Nigerians feeling about the economy? How are they feeling about their job prospects? How are they feeling about, right, the jobs that they are in, the ability of those jobs, right, to keep or to create a distant sustenance for them. And that's what we tried to do with the report. And what that actually showed was that each of Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones are dealing with very important and critical macroeconomic shocks. In the Southeast, for example, 6 in 10 households have experienced what we call the macroeconomic shock. A family member or a labor participant in that family either lost a job, lost a home, had their income significantly reduced in one shape or the other. Nationally, 45.3% of Nigerian households have experienced an economic shock within the last 12 months. And also the flight risk phenomenon in 5 out of 6 Nigeria's geopolitical zones. A majority of our respondents say they will rather leave either to another part of the country where they think their economic prospects will be better, or out of the country overall. So we just wanted to put some numbers and some data to what people intuitively feel about the economy, and that's what we try to accomplish with this report.
That's quite interesting. That's such a disconnect. But before we come to the disconnect proper, I'll just read out some of the things I saw in that report. You found that 45.3% of households experienced a job loss, which you already mentioned, business closure, or inability to find work in the past 12 months. Now, what was the reason for this? I mean, in the past 12 months, we're saying 45.3%. That's a whole lot. Yeah. They either lost jobs, couldn't find a job, or even businesses collapsed. Why?
Most respondents report that there appears to be a skills mismatch. So it appears as though Nigerian companies, Nigerian employers, what they are looking for, they are not finding in significant droves within the jobs market. So something like almost 6 in 10 respondents nationally, and the concentration varies, right, per geopolitical zone. In the Northwest and in the Southwest, for example, the skills deficit was the chief reason many people self-reported as to why they're not getting jobs. So either they feel underqualified or they feel overqualified, or as we've probably been seeing, and there's actually a term for this in human resource circles, there's sort of a jobs qualification inflation, right, where employers, in order to try to maximize the amount of value that they get from one role, they pack a lot of responsibilities into that role. And for many Nigerians, it appears as though they may see some of the skill sets that they possess in a job description, but not all of it. And employers are not willing to take the bite in that sense. So that was the chief thing. Other issues included wider economic uncertainty, insecurity also being a big part of it, especially for those who are looking to move from secondary and tertiary Nigerian cities to tier 1 cities like Lagos, Abuja, or Port Harcourt, right? In that sense, insecurity is a big thing. Also for Nigerian entrepreneurs, insecurity was their primary concern, right? In that sense. And then a fourth reason was somewhat uncertainty around the regulatory picture. We have a new tax regime. The market still seems to be saying that there isn't a lot of clarity as to how the rules will be enforced, who they specifically apply to, the small business exemption for it. We tested and we found that perception and that understanding is not as widespread as, say, the Nigeria Revenue Service would like. And you also have a situation where there is something like an aspiration reality mismatch, where the kind of jobs that Nigerians would like to have is not matching the kinds of jobs that are on the market, especially in the services sector. There are lots of internship roles that are open, lower level, entry level jobs that are open. But at the price range, at the salary ranges that are being called right now, or that are being offered by Nigerian employers, lots of potential Nigerian employees are basically voting with their feet to essentially say those jobs don't look very attractive to them at the moment.
That's quite interesting. A lot of things you've ruled out now. And unfortunately, the last unemployment report we had was Q2 2024. And that is really sad because these numbers, these figures, this data, they're important in helping, government and policymakers to make decisions. But away from that, I like that you've sort of given us everything, but I want us to disaggregate it in terms of regions, because that's one thing I found very important in your report. Now, South-South has the greater propensity to relocate for a job. Southeast has the biggest, the highest household shock rate, from what you said. Northwest, you've found a skills deficit layered onto low pay and not necessarily a job shortage. Now, North Central is two economies, Abuja and others. The reality in Abuja is different from what you'll find in any other North Central state. And apart from that, Southwest's barrier is pay and infrastructure rather than skills or security. I totally agree. I mean, I'm here.
We are.
Exactly. And then Northeast is defined by a skills deficit and low pay with insecurity. Now, if we're going to be fixing this, do you support we make it a regional thing? How do we begin to fix this?
Oh, absolutely. And our thesis at SBM, and this cuts across not just this report, but practically all of our research, is that Nigeria is diverse, is multifaceted. The range of diversity of lived experiences right across Nigeria is so significant that you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach towards managing its socioeconomic issues. So take the Southeast, for example. A lot of that disruption, that household shock, has been driven by the historical hangover from the sit-at-home orders. So doing something around improving security and addressing the separatist issue there will go a long way towards ameliorating that situation. In the South-South, the high flight risk, something like 92% of respondents want to leave the Southeast in that sense. And this is Nigeria's prime oil-producing region.
South-South.
The South-South, rather, is Nigeria's prime oil-producing region in that sense. And we know that oil and gas is not a very big job sprinter. It may be valuable from a foreign exchange and from an overall GDP standpoint, but in terms of the numbers of people that it employs anywhere in the world, it's a very specialist sector. So other parts of the South-South economy have to be supported, whether it's agriculture or it's other forms of manufacturing or it's agro-allied industries. A lot of investment needs to go to that, right, in the Southeast. In the
South-South.
Or rather, in the South-South.
I get it.
In the Southwest, you have a situation where a lot of the valuable jobs are here, but it's quite top-heavy. It's not as spread out, and it's very Lagos and to a lesser extent, Ibadan, Ota concentrated in that sense. So creating a lot more opportunities in other states. Osun that just had an election, Ondo also that has significant agro-allied and mining potential, very important and very critical. So what that tells us, and this is just for the 3 southern geopolitical zones, but even extending it to the northern geopolitical zones, what this really tells us is encouraging the growth of regional clusters probably providing incentives for employers that create out of Lagos and Abuja and Port Harcourt jobs, because a lot of the new roles are still opening in cities like Lagos, where we are. That would probably go a long way. That wasn't addressed under the NTAA, the new Tax Act, but it would be worth exploring the NRS from an operational standpoint, whether offering those sort of tax breaks or offering some kind of incentives for people who actually create jobs outside of these areas, and also developing regional clusters from an infrastructural standpoint. The Oka, Onitsha, Asaba corridor, the Kano, Kaduna, Katsina corridors, the Port Harcourt, Aba, Umuahia, Uyo corridors from an infrastructural standpoint. So it's easier for people to take goods to market. It's easier to secure those road and rail corridors. Those are some of the kind of solutions which the government, if it does get a second term, or whichever government comes into power, come January or February 2027, those are some of the solutions that they should be looking at exploring.
That's interesting. I think we have a National Regional Development Policy 2026 to 2030. We'll talk about that later. But I want us to highlight another thing in South-South. You've talked about the fact that, the oil and gas thing is there. But apart from that, we find a situation where there is this hidden tax on the South-South, labor market, with 33 of your respondents talking about how that they cannot find or keep work. And they are talking about it has to do with connection, really. How much of an issue is that?
Oh, yeah, it very much is, because our labor markets are not necessarily as transparent as they would like. And that's a symptom of a slow-growing economy. Usually in fast-growing economies, employers are looking to hire hands at the speed of light. People tend to be more transparent about making open calls, prioritizing or publishing salary ranges, which obviously would help the jobs market, calibrate its own expectations in that sense, and you're able to more efficiently allocate human resources. So that's what you're seeing in the South-South. And then when you have a situation where in a region that for 6 decades now, and that's roughly how long we've been mining oil, right, in that part of the country, the expectation has been born across 3 generations that getting a job in oil and gas is the pinnacle of career achievement. And then you couple that with what I said earlier, which is that oil and gas is not a good printer of a lot of jobs. In that sense, you have a situation where people who have already found a way to enter that sector, right, and enjoy the benefits of that sector will go out of their way to encourage their wards or to find ways to ensure that their loved ones continue to enjoy those benefits by joining them in this sector. So that's kind of what you're seeing with 3 in 10 respondents essentially saying they need some kind of connection in order to get there, because it would appear as though that's the main port of call, or that's the main direction of travel, right, in order to enter the oil and gas industry in the South.
Okay, away from that, I'd like you to sort of highlight some other things that are very important, from this particular report.
So the flight risk, I think, is critical. And I know when we talk about JACPA, everyone tends to think about the external migration, but we talked about another report, and I think I was here to discuss, I think that was probably the last report that we discussed, where we talked about internal migration, right, within Nigeria. Lots of people are looking to leave parts of the country that appear to them to be job-starved or starved of economic opportunities.
Are those places really job-starved? If they are, why is that so? And what are the economic managers in those areas, those regions, doing about them?
Well, in many cases, not much. And this is where not seeing jobs within a holistic program of economic reform is sort of enabling Nigeria to shoot itself in the foot somewhat. So take Lagos, for example. Part of what I always say about the inward migration towards Lagos, and Lagos has been a net recipient of migrants since the colonial periods, right, is that Lagos cannot solve that problem in a vacuum. So Lagos could deliver the best infrastructure possible, but if the rest of Nigeria isn't printing jobs at a decent enough clip, there will be pressure on waste management systems in Lagos. There will be pressure on roads. There will be pressure on rail. There will be pressure on the waterways. There will be pressure on electricity, as well as other amenities within right, this city. So the government essentially celebrating an uptick, not by much, but an uptick in foreign direct investment. Whether foreign direct investment is basically Lagos-centric, is actually not doing the Nigerian economy a lot of favors, because if anything, it makes Lagos overperform from an economic attractiveness standpoint compared to the rest of the country. And that will continue to attract people to Lagos. What we need to do is encourage at the subnational level, and the state governments have a lot of work to do in this space as well, right, in terms of health and education and social services as well. Because one thing that people who have good jobs like are good social amenities, right? So at least creating that social safe space is very important and very critical in order to move the needle in terms of broad-based economic development right across the country. That's the first point. I think the second point to highlight in the report is that 52% of respondents say in terms of what the country can do to help them improve their personal lot, they need to acquire more digital skills, right? Whether it's exposure or increased competency in artificial intelligence and increased exposure to specialist software, which is increasingly becoming a barrier to entry in many professional sectors. You're thinking engineering, you're thinking law, you're thinking medicine increasingly, you're thinking tech, right? Irrespective of whatever sector those skill sets are applied to, almost in every geopolitical zone, I think except the Northwest, the vast majority of respondents say they need more enhanced digital skills. I know the Ministry of Communications is doing some work in that light, but more definitely needs to be plowed to ensure that Nigerians are put in the best possible place in order to be competitive in the 21st century.
All right, thank you so much, Ikemesit Effiong, partner SBM Intelligence, for joining us on the show and, helping us unpack this particular report.
Thank you for having me.